Imagine a land where every shadow hides a survivor from another age, where the ground itself remembers monsters so massive, even today's deadliest creatures seem tame. Australia isn't just a country, it's nature's ultimate test, a place where ancient giants once ruled, and every step outside still feels like rolling the dice. What if I told you that the wildest stories you've heard are only the beginning? Welcome to the world's most dangerous playground. Are you ready to see what lurks beneath the surface? What if I told you that someone, anywhere in the world, blindfolded and barefoot, there's a good chance the place they'd least want to land is somewhere in Australia? Even in the digital age, the country's reputation precedes it. Etched into the collective imagination as a sunburned continent teeming with creatures that seem designed not just to startle, but to test the limits of human nerve. There's an odd thrill in telling people you grew up in a land where checking your shoes is a daily ritual, and nobody ever lifts a rock without pausing first to wonder if it might be the last thing they do. The stories filter around the world. Tales of snakes in toilets, spiders the size of a spread hand nesting under car visors, shimmering blue-ringed octopuses lurking in tide pools no bigger than a child's bucket, and crocodiles that have been known to snatch full-grown cattle from riverbanks with a snap. It would be easy to think these stories are exaggerated, the product of bored minds looking to spice up a landscape defined by red deserts and sun-bleached beaches. But the reality is far more fascinating, and, for the unprepared, much less forgiving. Even the most jaded traveler, lulled by the idea that modern life has smoothed the edges of danger, finds themselves alert in Australia in a way that feels primal. In other countries, keep out signs warn of slippery rocks or strong currents. In Australia, nature itself seems to flash a neon warning, look but do not touch, everywhere you turn. It starts before you even step outside. Windows in suburban homes come fitted with tight mesh screens, not just to keep out flies, but to give redback spiders and huntsmen pause. Locals learn to shake out towels left drying in the sun, a habit passed down with the same urgency as learning to swim or avoid stepping on glass. Take a walk through the bush, and there's a constant, almost invisible dialogue with the land. Watch where you put your hands. Listen for rustles in the grass. Keep an eye out for tracks that suggest something larger has passed through before you. The feeling isn't just anxiety. It's respect, hard-earned over generations by people who learned that a moment's carelessness could lead to consequences both swift and unexpected. There's no grandstanding in this vigilance. It's as natural as breathing, a subtle thread woven through the tapestry of daily life. It binds together surfers and ranchers, school children and city dwellers, as they move through a world where every shadow could hold a surprise, and every tranquil pond might conceal something ancient and hungry. Yet for all this, Australians carry their country's reputation with a sort of wry pride. Yes, the creatures are dangerous, but the danger itself becomes a badge of honor, survived, laughed about, woven into family legends. People swap stories over barbecues about near misses with brown snakes, or the time someone's cousin had to chase a goanna out of their kitchen. The local wildlife becomes less an enemy than a relentless, unpredictable neighbor, one you can't quite ignore, but whose presence sharpens your awareness of the wildness that still lurks at the edges of civilization. This is modern Australia, a place where city skylines rise above saltwater rivers haunted by crocodiles, where the world's most venomous snakes might bask on the same rocks as sunbathers, and where the distance between safety and peril is measured not in miles, but in heartbeats. For visitors, the sense of unease often fades into wonder and awe at the sheer variety and audacity of life, both dangerous and beautiful, that calls this place home. For those who live here, it's a dance as old as the continent itself, a delicate balance between caution and curiosity, respect and resilience. It's tempting to think that with enough knowledge, enough caution, you could keep the wild at bay. Yet the statistics tell a story that humbles even the boldest explorer. Australia's environment is not just a backdrop, it's an active participant in every moment, a living, breathing entity with its own rules. And the creatures that inhabit it are not just obstacles to be avoided, but ancient survivors, honed by millennia to thrive in a world where only the cleverest, quickest, or most quietly dangerous endure. Here, danger wears many faces. It slithers through undergrowth, glides on ocean currents, lurks under fallen logs, and sometimes sits quietly, coiled and watchful, waiting for the careless or the unlucky. If there is a lesson that modern Australia teaches, it's that security is always provisional, and every day is an invitation to test the boundaries between fear and fascination. Still, for all the warnings, for all the tales that keep children wide-eyed at bedtime, the land remains magnetic, irresistible, a place where the ordinary collides with the extraordinary, and where survival itself becomes a story worth telling. This is the great paradox at the heart of Australia's reputation. It terrifies, and yet it draws you closer, daring you to look a little longer, step a little further, and see what waits just beyond the edge of the known. As you trace your way across the landscape, it becomes clear that the threat isn't a single creature or a single place. It's a tapestry, woven from 1,000 silent dangers and glittering possibilities. And nowhere is this more true than in the world of Australian wildlife, a realm that turns statistics into cautionary tales and records into reasons to pause before putting a single foot forward. Nowhere else on Earth do so many records of venom and violence cluster together in one place. Australia stands unrivaled as the continent of extremes, a land that seems, at times, to be locked in a friendly competition with itself for the title of world's deadliest. Scientists tally the numbers and the results are staggering. Out of the 25 most venomous snakes on the planet, Australia is home to 20. The list reads like an arms dealer's catalog. The inland taipan, the eastern brown, the coastal taipan, tiger snakes, death adders, and more. The top 11 most venomous snakes in the world are all Australian natives, a kind of biological badge that makes even the bravest herpetologist pause. But it doesn't stop there. Move from the forest floor to the ocean, and the parade of potential dangers continues. The box jellyfish, drifting almost invisibly through warm tropical waters, carries a sting so potent it can bring a heart to a halt in just a couple of minutes. For beachgoers, the blue-ringed octopus is a pocket-sized puzzle, tiny enough to sit quietly in the palm of your hand, yet armed with toxins powerful enough to impact dozens of people. Even the cone snail, with its beautiful, innocuous-looking shell, hides a weapon so efficient that it has earned the nickname cigarette snail, because, as the old joke goes, if you're stung, you won't have time to finish one. Step back on land and the dangers seem to multiply with every shift of the wind. The Sydney funnel-web spider, dark and gleaming, has a bite capable of overwhelming an adult within the hour. Its relatives, the redback and the mouse spider, keep their own corners of the country on alert. Then there are the saltwater crocodiles, descendants of an ancient dynasty whose patience and power make them the reigning monarchs of every river, estuary, and billabong they inhabit. Some stretch longer than a small car, weighing as much as a delivery van, and have earned a reputation not just as relics of a prehistoric past, but as living reminders that nature in Australia is never really tamed. Even creatures that seem harmless elsewhere can become adversaries here. Take the cassowary, a bird with bright blue and red markings and a reputation for shyness, unless cornered, when it can leap and slash with dagger-like claws. Few birds anywhere in the world have caused as much caution as the cassowary, which, with a single kick, can turn curiosity into regret. Beneath the waves, in the rock pools and reefs, more records wait to be discovered. There are, by conservative estimate, at least 66 species of venomous marine animals patrolling Australian waters, an arsenal of stings, bites, and chemical surprises that rivals anything found on land. For divers and snorkelers, the rule is simple: admire, but never touch. All of this adds up to an environment where every step is an exercise in probability, a kind of natural roulette where the stakes are high and the rules always favor the house. Yet, perhaps paradoxically, this litany of dangers doesn't keep people away. If anything, it adds to the country's allure, infusing every hike, swim, and exploration with an undercurrent of excitement. Australians themselves become connoisseurs of caution, experts in risk management, their daily routines shaped by the simple recognition that beauty and peril walk hand in hand on this ancient continent. It's not just a matter of survival, it's a celebration, a recognition that living close to the edge is both a challenge and a privilege. The wildness that lingers at the heart of Australia isn't a relic to be conquered or a threat to be erased. It's the pulse that animates the land, a reminder that here, more than almost anywhere else, life and danger are inseparable. And as the sun sets behind red cliffs and wild rivers, you can't help but feel a certain respect, a gratitude even, for the world's most beautiful, unpredictable, and astonishingly dangerous island. Yet, as fearsome as modern Australia may seem, with all its stinging, slithering, and snapping inhabitants, there's an even more astonishing truth waiting beneath the surface. The stories of today's dangers are just the latest chapter in a saga that stretches back tens of thousands of years. A story in which nature's creativity and humanity's resolve would be tested in ways almost unimaginable. The roulette wheel is still spinning, but to understand the full measure of the risks, you have to look back. Back to a time when Australia's monsters made even today's nightmares seem tame by comparison. No matter how many warning signs dot the beaches, or how many snakebite kits fill suburban cabinets, the real terror in Australia sometimes comes not from the animals themselves, but from the land's wild, restless power. For all our modern science and planning, there are moments when the continent seems to shrug off the thin layer of civilization and remind everyone that nature here operates on a scale both epic and unpredictable. In the memories of millions, the summer of 2019-2020 burned itself into the nation's collective psyche, a season now simply known as Black Summer. For months, walls of flame marched across the landscape, leaping rivers, devouring forests, and throwing up skies so red and dark that day turned briefly to night. Winds picked up embers and carried them for miles, igniting new infernos where moments before there had been calm. The smell of smoke seeped into cities, schools closed, and at times it seemed as if there was no safe place left anywhere east of the desert. More than 46 million acres, an area larger than many countries, were swept clean by fire. The numbers that emerged later sounded almost mythic. Over 1 billion wild animals gone, whole populations of birds and marsupials reduced to scattered survivors clinging to smoldering patches of bush. Entire ecosystems, ancient forests, rare woodlands, changed in days in ways that would take generations, if ever, to recover. The orange and black skies that stretched for hundreds of miles were not just a spectacle, they were a signal. The land itself was both the stage and the actor in a drama older than any human memory. Australians are no strangers to fire. It has always been a part of the continent's rhythm, shaping landscapes, germinating seeds, even creating the open grasslands that support kangaroos and emus. But Black Summer was different, a moment when the normal cycles tipped into something raw and unpredictable, a new era of consequence set in motion by rising temperatures and shifting patterns of wind and rain. It was a time when people watched helplessly as flames raced faster than any human could run, when firefighters from around the world joined local crews in battles measured not just in acres saved, but in communities held together against a force that seemed almost sentient in its hunger. As the smoke cleared, the land revealed scars both visible and invisible. The blackened trunks, the hush where birdsong used to echo, the burnt-out outlines of homes and memories, all of it a reminder that in Australia, the line between order and chaos is always thin. People rebuilt, animals crept back from the ashes, and green shoots sprouted through the black soil, as they always do. But something had changed. For many, the terror was not just in what had been lost, but in the realization that the old certainties about safety, about predictability, about the future, could be swept away as easily as a gust of wind carries flame. Yet the story of these disasters is not just one of loss. It is also a story of resilience, of cockatoos gathering in burnt trees, of kangaroos bounding through smoke-streaked dawns, of communities forging new bonds in the face of disaster. Every fire season brings new lessons, new adaptations, both for people and for the land itself. The animals that have survived here the longest, wombats digging deep burrows, koalas seeking refuge in the highest trees, snakes vanishing into cracks in the earth, have all evolved ways to outlast the unpredictable. Their quiet endurance becomes an example, a reminder that in this ancient land, survival is written into the bones of every living thing. But the aftermath of catastrophe does more than change landscapes. It seeps into the national imagination. Fires, floods, and droughts become a kind of folklore, cautionary tales that warn of nature's power and the limits of human control. Even the youngest children grow up hearing stories of the great fires and the creatures that endured them. Stories that sharpen a healthy respect for the wild and a sense of awe that, here more than anywhere, the land itself is alive, powerful, and deeply mysterious. Yet, as sobering as these recent catastrophes are, they represent only a shadow of what once roamed this continent. It is easy to look at the devastation wrought by modern fires or the tally of stings, bites, and close calls and imagine that Australia's danger peaked with the present. But to believe that is to miss the greatest twist in the country's tale. Because as terrifying as today's Australia can be, the world that existed here tens of thousands of years ago was a realm so extraordinary, so oversized in its threats and wonders, that it makes our modern perils seem almost comforting by comparison. In a strange way, all the things that keep people cautious today, the deadly snakes, the venomous spiders, the lurking crocodiles, the sudden sweeping fires, are only echoes of a much older, wilder time. A time when the balance of power in the landscape was set not by humans, but by giants. Creatures that defy imagination, monsters that walked, swam, and soared across a primeval Australia that had no parallel anywhere else on Earth. 50,000 years ago, the continent was not merely dangerous, it was apocalyptic, a testing ground for evolution's wildest experiments, a place where natural selection operated on a scale almost cinematic in its intensity. Back then, the tallest trees cast shadows not just over kangaroos and cockatoos, but over land-running crocodiles that could sprint after prey on long legs, lizards as heavy as compact cars, and snakes thick as a man's thigh, strong enough to squeeze the life from animals that would dwarf anything living here today. It was a world where the familiar lines between predator and prey blurred, where even the plant eaters were built like living tanks, and the sky itself could bring threats in the form of birds as tall as a man and as relentless as any lion. For the first people who arrived here, brave explorers with only stone tools and fire to guide them, the land would have seemed not just challenging, but otherworldly. Every day a roll of the dice against odds no human had ever faced before. Looking at the sunlit beaches and busy cities of modern Australia, it's hard to imagine that the dangers we fret about now are, in the grand sweep of history, only the faintest aftershocks of a much larger drama. The so-called kiddie pool of today's Australia is nothing compared to the ancient arena it once was, a stage set for creatures whose size, power, and ferocity have no real match in the world we know. The fires, the floods, the daily dances with spiders and snakes, they are all, in a sense, the distant echoes of an age when the very fabric of life here was woven from struggle, adaptation, and the relentless testing of boundaries. To understand what it truly means to survive in Australia is to look back, not with nostalgia, but with awe, at a time when every day brought new giants out of the shadows and every path led through a wilderness that redefined the meaning of wild. And if the stories of today's Australia make you pause before wandering too far from the beaten path, just wait until you step into the world of the ancient titans, a place where survival was an achievement and fear itself was simply another sense, sharpened by the possibility that at any moment something unimaginable might come crashing through the undergrowth. To truly grasp how Australia earned its reputation as the world's wildest proving ground, you have to travel back in time, past every familiar signpost and every modern fear. Imagine standing on this continent not centuries, but tens of thousands of years ago, when not a single human footprint had yet pressed its soils. The air is thick and heavy, shimmering in the endless sun, or chilled by sudden storms that roll in from the ocean without warning. This is a world in flux, shaped by forces both ancient and alien to the eyes of any newcomer. The land itself sprawls wide and wild, a patchwork of dense eucalyptus forests, open woodlands, and vast inland seas that breathe in and out with the cycles of the climate. Rivers carve their way through stony plains and flood out across saltbush deserts, leaving behind temporary wetlands that become both oasis and battlefield. Towering grasslands ripple in the wind, concealing creatures that move with stealth and power, while tangled forests echo with the calls of birds larger and more formidable than any that exist today. Australia's isolation has always been its secret engine of change. For millions of years, this continent drifted apart from the rest of the world, cut off by endless ocean, marooned like a forgotten experiment. Here, life was forced to adapt in unique ways. Without large placental mammal predators to fill the top of the food chain, marsupials rose up, evolving into forms that could challenge any tooth or claw found elsewhere. At the same time, the climate veered between extremes. Ice ages brought dry, cold winds that hardened the survivors, while wet, warmer cycles filled the land with life, and with fierce competition for every resource. The plants themselves posed challenges, evolving toxins and tough leaves to deter grazers. Fire wasn't just a hazard, it was a sculptor, shaping entire forests that could survive being burned to the ground and spring back stronger. Rainfall patterns shifted, sometimes nourishing thick jungles, sometimes leaving much of the interior thirsty and exposed. For animal life, it meant that the rules changed constantly, and only those willing to adapt, or dominate, would claim the land as their own. Into this ever-shifting arena, a parade of giants marched. The absence of humans and large land predators created a vacuum where the size and ferocity of every species could spiral upward. Without any external check on their growth, herbivores ballooned into armored behemoths. Predators, in turn, became faster, stronger, and more specialized in their pursuit of the next meal. Survival meant not just blending in or running away, but growing bigger, developing weapons, and sometimes forging partnerships with the landscape itself, learning to use the dense thickets for ambush, the rivers for stealth, the fire-scarred plains for escape routes. Each sunrise brought its own roll call of threats and opportunities. Massive, slow-moving herbivores lumbered across open fields, their sheer bulk a defense against all but the most determined attacker. Giant lizards, the ancestors of today's monitors, staked out their territories with cold calculation, waiting for any sign of weakness or distraction. Crocodilians, already ancient when dinosaurs vanished elsewhere, took advantage of both land and water, ambushing anything that wandered too close to the muddy banks. The climate itself acted as both gatekeeper and gauntlet. Prolonged droughts could turn lush wetlands into death traps, stranding entire populations and forcing desperate migrations. Sudden rains would refill ancient lakes, bringing bursts of new life, and with it, new predators ready to claim their share. In the forests, thick canopies shielded strange, climbing marsupials, some with jaws designed for breaking bones, others equipped for slicing through the toughest vegetation. Below, the undergrowth seethed with reptiles, insects, and small mammals, each one perfectly tuned to exploit the fleeting advantages offered by this restless land. Unlike any other continent, Australia's evolutionary pathways seem to double back on themselves, experimenting with forms and functions long abandoned elsewhere. Here, mammals developed pouches rather than placentas. Birds abandoned flight to become towering sprinters. Lizards and snakes grew larger, more powerful, more inventive in their strategies for attack and defense. The land's very unpredictability, the fires, the floods, the sudden changes in temperature, became the crucible that forged these unique adaptations. And so, in the silence before the first human arrival, Australia's monsters reigned supreme. Each one was the product of countless generations of selective pressure, shaped not by the gentle hand of balance, but by the raw energy of survival at the edge of the possible. Their world was one of constant competition, a living arms race where the only rules were adapt, grow, or disappear. In this kingdom of extremes, fear wasn't just an emotion, it was an evolutionary driver, fueling every leap, every sprint, every careful glance into the shadows. No corner of the land was truly safe, no hour entirely without risk. It was a realm where the boundary between predator and prey shifted as quickly as the wind, and where every heartbeat could bring the challenge of a lifetime. Before the first spark of a human campfire, before the first spear was hurled or the first footprint pressed into red dust, Australia was already a continent defined by wild ambition and relentless innovation. The monsters that ruled here were not accidents. They were the inevitable result of a land that demanded the extraordinary, a climate that allowed no compromise, and a history written in teeth, claws, and the will to overcome. And just beyond the horizon of this ancient world, something new was coming. An intelligence, a creativity, a curiosity that would change the balance forever. But in those lost days, as the sun rose over grasslands and riverbanks alive with giants, it was the monsters, not mankind, who set the rules. The stage was set. The first wave of fear had claimed its throne. The giants waited, and the story of survival was only just beginning. The rivers of ancient Australia were not the only places where danger waited. Sometimes nightmares did not glide beneath the water, but came crashing through the brush, sending birds screeching skyward and scattering anything in their path. In this age before humans, when the land was ruled by giants and innovation meant survival, the terror of the landscape was not always hidden beneath the surface. Sometimes it strode boldly on powerful limbs, hunting under the open sky. This was Quincana, a predator whose very name carries the chill of an ancient warning. Imagine a crocodile, but stripped of its lazy riverbank reputation and rebuilt for a far more ambitious life. Quincana was no sluggish lurker waiting for something to stumble into its jaws. It was a beast of movement and momentum, a reptile that had traded the art of patience for the thrill of pursuit. Its body, stretching 10 feet or more in an average adult, carried a dense frame that could double in size for the largest individuals, monsters that dwarfed most predators alive today. But size alone wasn't its only weapon. Where modern crocodiles move with a belly pressed low, gliding just above mud or water, Quincana's long, muscular legs lifted its body clear off the ground, allowing it to sprint across rough terrain. Each stride was powered by hoof-like toes, gripping rock and soil with uncanny precision, giving this creature the agility to pursue prey on open land. Its tail, less a paddle and more a living counterbalance, helped it turn on a dime, lending a frightening speed and unpredictability to every chase. In this way, Quincana was closer to a land predator than any crocodilian alive today, a living contradiction to everything we think we know about these ancient reptiles. But perhaps its most chilling feature lay hidden within its jaws. Unlike the rounded, gripping teeth of river crocs, designed to hold slippery fish or drag heavy animals underwater, Quincana's teeth were sharp, deeply serrated, and curved for one purpose: slicing flesh. These were teeth built not just to hold, but to carve, to open muscle and snap bone with terrifying efficiency. When Quincana closed its jaws, the force behind them could exceed 1,500 pounds per square inch, enough pressure to split a grown human's torso in a single crunch or shatter the limbs of even the largest prey. With this arsenal, Quincana ruled not just the river's edge, but the open plains and tangled forests beyond. It was not bound to water, though it could swim when needed. Its real kingdom was the land, where its speed and bite allowed it to outmatch almost any rival. Prehistoric marsupials and reptiles, even the largest of the lumbering herbivores, were never safe. For Quincana, every trail was a potential hunting ground, every shadow an ambush waiting to unfold. In the heat of the day, when most creatures hid from the relentless sun, Quincana stalked the game trails and forest margins, relying on its keen senses and the camouflage of mottled scales. At night, when the world shrank to a hush and the only sounds were the distant calls of unseen animals, it became something closer to a legend, a presence that haunted every creature's dreams. The ground itself seemed to remember the paths of these hunters, their footprints pressed deep into the mud and preserved for thousands of years as a warning to anyone who might walk here again. Quincana's reign lasted for millennia, its adaptability and power making it a fixture of the continent's food chain. It was a living paradox, neither entirely of the water nor the land, but a perfect predator in both. The fear it inspired shaped the behaviors of countless species. Animals grew wary, changed their feeding times, learned to listen for the rustle of leaves or the thud of heavy feet. Even the mightiest herbivores would quicken their pace near riverbanks or open clearings, never sure if the next moment would bring the thunder of pursuit. To walk through ancient Australia was to enter a world calibrated for survival, where every sense was tuned to the possibility of attack. And at the heart of this landscape, Quincana moved with the confidence of a ruler who had never been challenged, a living nightmare that wrote its own laws in tooth and muscle. The memory of its reign still lingers in the rocks and fossils of the continent, a shadow that reminds us just how wild and how unforgettable the ancient world could be. Escape was never a simple option in the era of Quincana. Unlike the crocodiles we know today, masters of silent ambush, lurking beneath green water, their eyes just breaking the surface, this hunter rewrote the rules of pursuit. For the creatures that shared its world, the familiar survival strategies were suddenly obsolete. Running to higher ground? Diving into the nearest water hole? Neither offered any real protection from a predator that belonged as much to the land as to the water. Quincana's edge began with its physique. Its muscular limbs and arched posture allowed it to stride confidently across forests, grasslands, and rocky riverbanks. Where today's crocodiles slide and slither, Quincana bounded and sprinted, lifting its powerful bulk well above the ground. It could chase down prey with a speed that defied expectations, covering rough, uneven terrain without losing balance. This agility made the open plains as much its territory as the winding waterways. Every clearing was a potential trap. Every stretch of dry land could become a hunting ground in the blink of an eye. Unlike the stealthy, patient modern crocodile that waits motionless for hours, Quincana was bold and relentless. It could launch itself into pursuit, closing the distance between hunter and hunted with terrifying speed. Its hoof-like toes gripped earth and stone, letting it dig in for sudden turns or lunges. Even the sure-footed marsupials and quick herbivores that dominated the ancient landscape were never entirely out of reach. No amount of sprinting could guarantee escape. The predator's endurance and sudden bursts of power left few safe havens. But if desperation drove a creature to the water, there was little hope there either. Quincana might have been a land specialist, but it never abandoned its aquatic heritage. Its body, still streamlined and muscular, allowed for competent swimming when the need arose. Riverbanks and wetlands became double-edged swords. A victim fleeing from Quincana might find themselves outpaced on land, only to slip into the water and discover the hunter was right behind, adapting seamlessly from sprint to swim. While not as swift or maneuverable in the water as today's strictly aquatic crocodiles, Quincana was more than capable enough to close in on anything that thought the river meant safety. Its senses were as keen as its jaws. The hunter's eyes, set high on the skull, scanned both above the grass and beneath the surface. Nostrils adapted to pick up the faintest scent of blood or movement, while a powerful tail offered balance on land and thrust in water. Even its hearing was tuned to the smallest snap of a twig or ripple in the stream. There was no single environment where a potential meal could ever relax, no place beyond reach. The threat of Quincana forced evolution's hand. Prey animals adapted not just to hide or flee, but to anticipate. Herds began to stick to denser cover, feeding at unpredictable hours, ever alert for the distinctive shadow or the vibration of heavy steps. Waterholes, once seen as sanctuaries in times of thirst, became sites of constant anxiety, places where the bold risked everything for a drink. Survival now meant more than speed or caution. It required a sixth sense for danger and a deep knowledge of the landscape. What truly set Quincana apart, though, was its unpredictability. Unlike its river-bound relatives, it made no bargains with territory. Its hunger could lead it miles from the nearest water, patrolling the land with the same confidence as it did the shallows. Its kingdom was wherever it chose to hunt. It didn't matter whether the sun blazed overhead or the rain pounded the ground. Quincana adapted, endured, and thrived. For ancient Australia's wildlife, this was the age of vigilance. Every splash, every tremor in the earth, every fleeting shadow could be the herald of disaster. The traditional refuge of water meant nothing when the hunter was just as deadly on land. Escape was a gamble with terrible odds, and Quincana's presence made sure every living creature understood the true meaning of nowhere left to run. The legacy of this predator lingers in the bones scattered along ancient riverbeds and in the caution encoded into the DNA of those that survived. Quincana was not just a crocodile. It was a reminder that, in a world shaped by relentless innovation, safety is always temporary, and the rules of the chase are written by those bold enough to run anywhere their hunger leads. The terror of meeting Quincana was never just about its size or its speed. It was the jaws, the mechanics of a mouth shaped not only by hunger, but by the relentless demands of survival in an unforgiving world. Most crocodiles grip and drag, using blunt, conical teeth to latch on to slippery prey and pull them underwater. Quincana, however, was a different kind of hunter, and its bite was the last thing any creature ever felt. Picture the moment frozen in time. A rustle in the brush, a flash of movement, and suddenly the world narrows to the gleam of teeth closing in. But these were not the rounded tools of river ambush. Quincana's mouth was an arsenal of bladed weapons, each tooth tall, curved, and deeply serrated, more like a row of steak knives than the tools of a fisherman. As the jaws snapped shut, these teeth didn't merely hold, they sliced, ripping clean through muscle, hide, and even bone. The mechanics of the bite were a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering. The powerful skull was reinforced for both crushing and shearing. driven by muscles that anchored deep along the neck and jaw. When Quincana lunged, its jaws opened wide, wider than most modern crocodiles, allowing a lightning-fast strike. The impact was explosive. A bite force measured in the thousands of pounds per square inch drove those blade-like teeth through anything in their path, splitting a limb or torso with brutal efficiency. In one decisive moment, prey that had spent its whole life on the lookout for danger became little more than a memory scattered in the dirt. Yet it wasn't just the raw strength that made Quincana's attack so devastating. It was the precision, the way its teeth interlocked and cut rather than crushed. Where modern crocodiles depend on dragging struggling prey into the water to finish the job, Quincana's kill could be almost instantaneous on land. Muscles sheared, arteries opened, bones severed. The victim rarely had a chance to fight back, let alone escape. The predator's head was built for this violence. Heavy, robust, and edged with ridges to absorb and distribute the shock of each powerful snap. It was perfectly balanced for quick strikes and powerful bites. The teeth were replaced throughout its life, always razor sharp, always ready for the next kill. As the jaws clamped shut, the force was not just forward, but downward and sideways, pulling flesh apart with each wrench of the head. Even the largest prey, massive marsupials, armored reptiles, or unsuspecting water birds, had little hope if caught in the path of that mouth. Quincana's hunting style capitalized on this lethality. It did not need to rely on stealth alone. A sudden, aggressive charge was just as effective. Stalking the forest edge or shadowing herds at dusk, it would close the distance, waiting for hesitation or panic to scatter the group. With a burst of speed, it would single out the vulnerable, driving them away from cover. One lunge, one bite, and the outcome was decided. Often, the sheer shock and trauma from the wound would overwhelm the victim, leaving it helpless before the predator's relentless jaws finished the work. For the creatures of ancient Australia, the threat of Quincana was always present, always immediate. The memory of those jaws, capable of transforming life to aftermath in the space of a heartbeat, became part of the landscape itself. Trails avoided the hunting grounds, animals changed their habits, and even the bones that remain today bear the scars of those razor teeth. To imagine the bite of Quincana is to glimpse the reality of life in a world where every advantage was earned, every weakness punished without hesitation. Its mouth was the final word in a contest shaped by evolution, a tool so perfectly lethal that its legend echoes in the rocks and riverbeds long after the last hunter disappeared. In the silent shadow of those ancient forests and plains, the echo of snapping jaws still lingers, a reminder that here, for a long and fearsome era, the world belonged to the sharpest blade. In the ancient world of Australia, where rivers pulsed with predators and shadows concealed powerful jaws, another titan claimed the open land, a creature so outsized and formidable that even the memory of its name feels like a challenge. Megalliana, the land dragon, was a hunter unlike any that walks the earth today. Where Quincana dominated with crushing power and bladed teeth, Megalliana brought a different kind of fear, a living relic of the age of monsters, a reptile whose size and presence could shift the balance of an entire ecosystem. To see Megalliana emerge from the haze of prehistory is to witness an animal that dwarfed almost everything in its path. At its smallest, it stretched over 11 feet from nose to tail, longer than most modern Komodo dragons, which are themselves legends in their own right. But this was only the baseline. The largest individuals could grow to an astonishing 25 or even 26 feet, their bodies thick with muscle and bone, weighing close to 2 tons. Imagine an enormous monitor lizard scaled up far beyond anything that stalks the jungles of Indonesia today. A living shadow that could block the sun for smaller creatures. Its head was broad and angular, built for a crushing bite, while its eyes were set high, constantly scanning the horizon for movement. Each limb ended in formidable hooked claws, thick and curved for grasping, climbing, or ripping. The skin was armored with rows of hard, knobby scales, protection against both rival predators and the wild undergrowth. Even standing still, Megalania radiated a quiet, heavy menace, a sense that at any moment it could explode into action with startling speed for its massive size. Hunting for Megalania was not an exercise in patience, but one of opportunity and force. This predator did not depend on the cover of water or dense brush. Instead, it moved with confidence across open plains, through light forests, and along riverbanks, always searching for the next sign of weakness. Its thick, muscular tail provided balance and power, allowing for sudden, lunging charges that could bring it nose to nose with startled prey in seconds. Unlike the quick burst predators that rely on ambush, Megalania could cover long distances, tracking herds or trailing injured animals until exhaustion or panic provided the opening it needed. Its hunting technique was a blend of persistence and intimidation. Megalania might trail a wounded diprotodon, a prehistoric giant wombat, or a slow-moving marsupial across a field, its heavy footsteps thudding softly in the grass. When the moment was right, it surged forward, jaws opening wide to reveal rows of backward-curving teeth designed for gripping and holding. Even a glancing bite could be devastating. Modern monitor lizards deliver venom through their saliva, a cocktail that weakens, thins blood, and makes escape almost impossible. Megalania, drawing from the same evolutionary blueprint, likely possessed a similar edge. The pain and shock of its attack, combined with the risk of relentless bleeding and infection, meant that a single encounter could decide the fate of even the sturdiest prey. But Megalania's size and strength were not just about offense. Its bulk discouraged competition, and only the bravest or most desperate scavengers dared approach the remains of its kills. Smaller carnivores, ancient marsupial lions, or ambitious birds of prey circled at a distance, waiting for the land dragon to finish its meal and move on. The landscape seemed to bend around Megalania's needs. Prey herds learned to avoid the open, travel in tight groups, and change their patterns to avoid the hunter's favored paths. Even the giants had to keep one eye on the shadows. For thousands of years, Megalania was the specter on the horizon, the reason for 1,000 whispered warnings and sudden silences in the brush. It was the last of the land dragon, a creature that bridged the gap between the age of dinosaurs and the world of mammals, carrying with it the lessons and terrors of both. Its legacy endures in fossilized footprints, scattered bones, and the caution that still lingers in the habits of Australia's wild things. For in a world of giants, Megalania reigned as both predator and legend, the dragon that turned the ancient plains into its hunting ground, and every sunrise into a new test of survival. At the summit of Australia's ancient food chain, Megalania towered as the unrivaled master, a predator whose presence shifted the very rhythm of life across the wild continent. Its dominance was not merely a matter of size, though few could match its bulk or power, but of adaptability, ferocity, and a suite of advantages that allowed it to hold the crown against a world of ambitious rivals. To understand why Megalania became the apex predator, you must imagine a landscape where giants were the rule, not the exception, and every hunt was a high-stakes contest between strength, cunning, and endurance. Megalania's physical gifts were the foundation of its supremacy. Its massive frame, armored hide, and heavy muscles turned it into a moving fortress, immune to the casual attacks of lesser predators. No marsupial lion, however fierce, could hope to outmatch the sheer reach and crushing bite of the land dragon. Its claws could rake flesh or dismantle the carcass of even the largest herbivores. The force of a single swipe could open up a wound that spelled the end for anything caught in its path. Yet power alone was never enough in a world brimming with contenders for the throne. What elevated Megalania above the competition was its extraordinary versatility. Unlike the specialized hunters that flourished only in certain habitats or under particular conditions, Megalania roamed widely, crossing open plains, dense woodlands, and river margins with equal ease. Its diet was just as flexible. The land dragon did not restrict itself to a single prey. It could bring down the massive Diprotodon, a lumbering, car-sized marsupial, but was just as likely to feast on smaller wallabies, giant flightless birds, or the carcasses left behind by other predators. This opportunism made it less vulnerable to the boom and bust cycles of ancient climates. When drought turned the grasslands to dust or fire reshaped the forests, Megalania could adapt, shift its range, and endure when others perished. Its bite carried yet another secret weapon. Drawing on the evolutionary toolkit of its monitor lizard ancestors, Megalania likely wielded venom that thinned blood, weakened resistance, and turned any injury into a slow defeat for the victim. The combination of bone-crushing force and toxic saliva meant that a successful attack was usually fatal, even if the prey managed a brief escape. Few animals could survive the dual onslaught of trauma and envenomation, and those that tried soon fell behind the herd, vulnerable to a second finishing assault. Competition among the giants was fierce, and ancient Australia was anything but empty. Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, stalked the forests, using powerful jaws and retractable claws to ambush prey. Packs of predatory reptiles and birds of prey patrolled the skies and undergrowth. Crocodilians, like Quincana, prowled both land and river, their own bite a match for almost anything that crossed their path. Yet Megalania, with its towering height, unmatched reach, and lethal toolkit, stood a head above them all, literally and figuratively. Conflicts were inevitable. On a sun-baked plain, Megalania might clash with a Quincana over a fresh kill, each sizing the other up, neither eager to test the other's limits. Sometimes the standoff ended in a draw, each titan content to seek easier quarry elsewhere. More often, the land dragon's confidence prevailed. A bellow, a sudden rush, and even the most determined competitor would yield ground, unwilling to risk injury in a landscape where any weakness could be fatal. This dominance reshaped the very structure of the ecosystem. Prey species grew wary, evolving new strategies for survival, moving in tighter groups, changing migration patterns, and growing larger themselves to withstand the gauntlet of predators. Scavengers learned to keep their distance, waiting for Megalania to finish before daring to approach. Even the landscape bore the marks of its passage: well-worn trails, trampled clearings, and the scattered remains of ancient feasts. Megalania's reign was not only a triumph of brute strength, but of adaptability and relentless evolution. It stood as the final word in an arms race that had played out over millions of years, an apex predator that pushed every other creature, hunter or hunted, to new extremes. As long as the land dragon stalked the ancient wilds, no animal, no matter how massive or well defended, could ever truly claim to be safe. When the day faded and shadows stretched across the plains, Megalania's silhouette remained a reminder of the primal order. The dragon at the peak, surveying a realm of giants, ruling not by chance, but by right. Its story is written in every fossilized bone, every scar on the land, and every echo of fear that still drifts through Australia's wildest places. For a time, nothing challenged the supremacy of the great lizard, and the world moved in step with its colossal stride. There is a peculiar terror in wounds that do not heal, in bites that promise not just an instant end, but a drawn-out ordeal, a legacy of poison carried in the blood. For the ancient animals of Australia, Megalania's jaws were more than instruments of brute force. They may have been a delivery system for a slow, inevitable decline. This is the venom hypothesis, the unsettling idea that, like its living relatives, Megalania didn't just attack with teeth and muscle, but also with a hidden chemical weapon that turned every wound into a countdown. In today's world, the Komodo dragon offers a living blueprint for how this might have worked. These formidable lizards don't rely solely on strength to bring down prey. With each bite, they introduce a cocktail of toxins: anticoagulants that prevent blood from clotting, enzymes that send shock through the system, and compounds that induce a spreading weakness. A bitten animal, even if it escapes the initial attack, finds itself growing weaker with every heartbeat. Blood leaks from the wound, energy drains away, and the world becomes a haze of confusion and exhaustion. Eventually, the victim collapses, sometimes hours, sometimes days later, while the dragon follows patiently, guided by an acute sense of smell, waiting for the venom's slow work to finish what its jaws began. Megalania, as the greatest of all terrestrial monitors, likely wielded a similar power. Its bite would have inflicted deep, jagged wounds, trauma enough on its own. But if venom was part of its arsenal, the terror didn't end when the jaws let go. The poison would have seeped quickly into the bloodstream, halting the body's natural defenses and leaving arteries open like broken pipes. Every attempt to run or fight back would only hasten the loss. Every drop of blood lost, tipping the scales further away from survival. The landscape itself would bear witness to the aftermath. Faint trails of crimson in the dust, growing fainter as the victim slowed, lay down, and never rose again. The evolutionary advantage of such a weapon is clear. In a world where prey could be enormous, strong, and even aggressive in their last moments, a slow-acting venom allowed the hunter to avoid direct, risky confrontations. There was no need for Megalania to wrestle a raging Diprotodon or outlast a panicked herd. A single well-placed bite was enough to decide the outcome. The predator could fall back, avoiding injury, and simply track its quarry as weakness set in. Hours later, it would return to claim the prize with little resistance. The competition, whether from rival predators or scavengers, reduced by the certainty that nothing could withstand both the trauma and the poison. This system shaped not just the success of the hunter, but the entire web of life around it. Prey animals evolved greater vigilance, warier social habits, even changes in blood chemistry to counteract such toxins. The battle was never just between tooth and flesh, but between adaptation and counter-adaptation, a silent arms race that played out over thousands of years. But the cost of a megalania bite went beyond the physical. The very knowledge, carried in scent and memory, that a wound could spell an inevitable decline changed how creatures lived. Waterholes, feeding grounds, and migration routes became places of tension and uncertainty. Every rustle in the brush might be a prelude to a bite that would not kill quickly, but would guarantee the end all the same. For the land dragon, the venom hypothesis gave it more than an edge. It offered mastery over time itself. Each hunt became a waiting game, an exercise in patience, confidence, and inevitability. The king of the ancient world did not need to rush or take reckless risks. It simply needed to bite, wait, and let evolution's most subtle weapon tip the balance in its favor. And so, in the deep past of Australia, fear was measured not just in moments of violence, but in the slow, relentless work of poison. Proof that sometimes the greatest dangers are those that linger long after the initial threat has faded, changing the rules of survival for all who dare to walk the land of giants. In the dawn-lit wilds of ancient Australia, the land trembled not just under the weight of one predator, but from the possibility that giants might meet in conflict, each one armed with unique, terrifying strengths. Here, every river crossing, every open plain, every shadowed forest edge became an arena where survival played out as a series of encounters between monsters. For the creatures of this world, the ordinary was defined by extraordinary danger, and even the most cautious step could spark a struggle between titans. Imagine a herd of Diprotodon, massive, wombat-shaped herbivores, their coats thick and eyes wide, lumbering toward a muddy waterhole. The morning air hangs heavy with fog and tension. The herd moves with a slow, deliberate rhythm, instinctively clustering together against the unknown. They are giants in their own right, each one weighing as much as a modern rhinoceros. But on this day, their bulk offers only the illusion of safety. Lurking in the reeds, jaws just breaking the surface, waits Quincana. Its body tensed, every muscle coiled. It is the definition of ambush, legs ready to spring, blade-like teeth glistening with anticipation. The river's calm is shattered by a sudden explosion of motion. Quincana lunges from the shallows, driving one massive animal from the group. Panic erupts as the herd scatters, the ground shaking beneath a stampede. The crocodile giant's speed and reach are unmatched in this moment, and in seconds the chase turns deadly, the outcome decided by a combination of raw force and practiced technique. A Diprotodon, separated and off balance, finds itself caught in the nightmare jaws, sliced, broken, and finished with a final crushing bite. Elsewhere, not far from the floodplain, Megalania stalks the grasslands with a different confidence. Its silhouette alone sends smaller creatures fleeing for cover. The land dragon does not hide. It advances, patient and certain, following the scent of blood or the distant calls of distressed animals. Perhaps it has caught the aftermath of Quincana's kill, a carcass left half-finished at the water's edge. The scavengers hover nervously, unwilling to approach as Megalania closes in. Even Quincana, bold as it is, may hesitate when confronted by a predator that rivals it in size and surpasses it in terrestrial agility. The meeting of Megalania and Quincana is a confrontation both rare and fraught with consequence. Each titan sizes up the other, nostrils flaring, muscles flexing beneath armored skin. The crocodilian's tail thrashes, stirring the mud, while Megalania holds its ground, claws gouging the earth. There is a moment of stillness, ancient, heavy with possibility. Sometimes the battle is averted, a snarl, a snap, and the titans part ways, neither willing to risk an injury that could spell ruin in this unforgiving land. But not always. There are times when hunger or pride pushes both to their limits, and the clash becomes unavoidable. When giants do battle, the violence is swift and overwhelming. Quincana uses its powerful jaws to strike low and hard, hoping to slice or shatter a limb. Megalania answers with a broadside swipe of its clawed forelimbs and a venom-laced bite aimed for soft tissue. The earth churns beneath their struggle, dust and blood clouding the air, the surrounding forest echoing with the roars and bellows of combat. Even if neither falls, both emerge marked by the encounter, ripped scales, torn flesh, memories etched into bone and sinew. Yet not every contest ends in direct conflict. Sometimes the giants wage war by proxy, their battles fought in the space between hunts, in the shifting alliances of scavengers and opportunists. The marsupial lion, smaller than either reptilian monster, but armed with bone-crushing jaws and a thief's cunning, might dart in after the dust settles, dragging away scraps from the giant's abandoned feasts. Giant flightless birds keep their distance, alert to the movements of predators who might turn their hunger toward easier prey. Even the patterns of the herds themselves change in response, growing warier and more unpredictable, always seeking new ways to survive amid such constant peril. These encounters, both imagined and real, shaped not only the lives of the creatures involved, but the very architecture of the ecosystem. Waterholes, open fields, and forest margins became charged with tension. Every creature scanning the world for a hint of movement, every path a potential intersection with fate. The struggle of giants became a pulse that ran through the land, a challenge that forced innovation, resilience, and caution into every living thing. The fossil record preserves only glimpses of these ancient dramas. A bite mark in a bone, the outline of a giant claw, the mingled footprints of predator and prey caught forever in hardened mud. But in those silent echoes, the story of a world ruled by monsters comes to life. A realm where every dawn carried the promise of epic confrontation, and every sunset was earned through a day of vigilance and hard-won survival. While the giants of claw and tooth battled across the ancient Australian plains, another shadow moved silently through forests, grasslands, and tangled wetlands. It did not roar or stampede, did not challenge for kills in the open. Its power was quieter, more patient, a constant threat that curled among roots, slipped between river stones, and watched from above with lidless golden eyes. These were the Matsoids, the dynasty of giant snakes, and their presence changed the very fabric of life on the continent. Unlike their modern venomous cousins, the Matsoids did not rely on toxins to subdue their prey. Their bodies alone inspired dread. Thick, muscular coils stretching up to 6 or even 7 meters in length, their weight measured in hundreds of pounds. A single giant snake could match or surpass the size of the biggest pythons alive today. Yet in the Australia of old, these reptiles faced a world where everything was scaled up. They evolved not just to survive, but to thrive, amid creatures twice their bulk and equally prepared for a life of perpetual vigilance. The largest of them, Wombi, ruled the shadows. Moving with eerie silence, it could slip unnoticed through high grass or descend from low branches, senses tuned to the faintest vibration. Its jaw, primitive and rigid compared to the dislocating wonders of modern snakes, gave it a different method of attack. There was no elegant unhinging of bone to swallow enormous prey whole. Instead, Wombi used backward-facing teeth to seize and tear, ripping at flesh and muscle, constricting with brutal strength until all resistance faded. But the Matsoids were more than just oversized constrictors. They were a force of adaptation, shaping the habits and strategies of every creature around them. Small mammals and birds learned to keep to open ground where a giant snake's approach could be seen and avoided. Marsupials raised their young high in the trees or in deep burrows, always wary of the slow, inevitable approach of something heavy and relentless. Even the biggest herbivores, Diprotodon, giant kangaroos, never truly let their guard down, for the Matsoids could wait for hours, their patience outlasting even the bravest or most desperate of prey. Their impact rippled through the ecosystem. Where giant lizards and crocodiles forced adaptations in speed and size, the Matsoids demanded constant vigilance from below and above. They were the invisible hunters, masters of ambush, capable of striking with terrifying precision. A sudden rustle, a tightening grip, the world going dark. It was a fate that haunted the edges of every watering hole and shaded thicket. Yet these snakes were more than monsters. They played a critical role in the balance of ancient Australia, thinning herds, checking the ambitions of smaller predators, and ensuring that no species, however strong or numerous, could dominate unchecked. By moving between worlds, on land, in trees, sometimes slipping into water, they knit together the different layers of the ecosystem, bridging the gaps between predator and prey, day and night, ground and sky. In the lore of the landscape, the Matsoids became a living boundary, a warning that not all dangers announce themselves with sound or movement. Their legacy remains in the bones they left behind, the patterns of fear and awareness that linger in the animal behaviors of today. As much as any dragon or crocodile, the Matsoids defined the ancient wilds, a silent threat that never needed to be seen to be feared, always waiting, always present, just beyond the next turn in the endless grass. In the quiet reaches of prehistoric Australia, where shadows fell long across the tangled bush and rivers wound through silent grasslands, there was a predator that made its name not with venom or speed, but with relentless force and chilling precision. Wombi, the great constrictor, was the master of a hunt that played out slowly, inexorably, as if time itself thickened in the coils of this giant snake. Wombi's anatomy was an answer to the unique demands of its world. Unlike the sleek, flexible pythons and bows of today, Wombi carried a more ancient blueprint. Its massive body was built for brute power. Muscles ran thick beneath rough, earth-colored scales, each segment capable of squeezing with astonishing force. Where a modern python might rely on grace and subtlety, Wombi's approach was raw, direct, and almost overwhelming in its certainty. The head was broad, the jaw stiff and primitive. Unlike today's snakes, which can unhinge their jaws and swallow prey many times the width of their skull, Wombi's mouth opened wide, but did not stretch to impossible limits. This meant that its prey, often massive in its own right, could not be taken whole. So, Wombi adapted in a way that set it apart from anything that moves through the forests now. Its teeth, curved backward and sharply pointed, lined a jaw designed to grip and tear. Instead of delicately enveloping its meal, Wambi latched on with a bone-jarring bite and began the work of breaking down its prey piece by piece. Flesh tore under its teeth, blood soaked into the dust. As the coils tightened, the victim's struggles grew weaker, its breath crushed out by the unyielding grip. This was not a quick or silent process. Every heartbeat that passed in Wambi's embrace was a moment of inescapable, escalating pressure. Rib cages collapsed, muscles tore. Sometimes, in the chaos of the hunt, the snake's teeth would rip open the soft underbelly of its prey, causing massive internal injuries even before the final squeeze. Wambi's hunting technique depended on this brutal efficiency. It did not wait motionless for hours, nor did it strike with blinding speed. Instead, it relied on patience and the silent confidence of a predator that knows nothing can resist its strength once caught. Stalking from the undergrowth or descending from a sturdy branch, Wambi would sense the vibrations of heavy footsteps, giant marsupials, birds, or smaller reptiles moving through its territory. With a sudden rush, it would launch itself at the target, jaws clamping shut around limb or torso, the muscular body already winding into position. Where a modern python will quietly suffocate its prey, often leaving barely a mark, Wambi's victims rarely escaped without visible trauma. The jaws were not forgiving, and the constriction was more than a slow suffocation. It was an act of overwhelming dominance, each contraction of muscle squeezing the life and resistance from the animal caught within. If the jaw found a vulnerable spot, an artery, a soft patch behind a shoulder, the kill was hastened by blood loss as well as by the relentless pressure on chest and lungs. This method had far-reaching effects on the ecosystem. Scavengers and other predators learned to track the aftermath of Wambi's hunts, following trails of blood and torn flesh to share in the remains. Herds altered their habits, keeping to open ground and avoiding brush too dense or too quiet. Even the boldest of the ancient animals grew cautious where the signs of a recent kill lingered in the grass. Wambi was not just a killer, but a force of nature, a creature that redefined fear not with poison, but with the inevitability of its grip. Its dominance rested on an older, more direct power, one that needed no toxins to claim its place at the table of giants. Where venom was subtle and silent, Wambi was the king of suffocation, a legend written in the silence after the struggle ended, and in the wary steps of every animal that learned to listen for the sound of scales moving through the ancient Australian dusk. Under the eerie twilight of ancient Australia, the aftermath of a Wambi attack was nothing short of a spectacle, a blood-stained reminder that life here obeyed older, harsher rules. Where modern pythons dislocate their jaws to swallow prey whole, the giants of the Matsoid dynasty approached their meals with methods far more visceral. Once a victim fell to the constrictor's crushing embrace, the ritual that followed spoke of strength, adaptation, and a predatory patience that left nothing to chance. The kill itself was rarely tidy. Wambi's backward-curving teeth, fixed in a powerful jaw, would clamp onto a limb or flank, the grip unbreakable even as the animal thrashed and kicked. While its muscular coils worked to squeeze the breath and life from its prey, the teeth would tear into flesh, opening ragged wounds that bled freely into the dust and leaves. There was no quick, merciful end. The prey, whether a massive bird, a marsupial, or a rival reptile, was first subdued by loss of air, then by the shock and trauma of torn muscle and skin. With suffocation came silence, but the feast was just beginning. Lacking the flexibility of modern snakes, Wambi did not swallow its victims whole. Instead, it used its formidable jaws and teeth as tools for disassembly. The stiff jaw, unable to stretch wide enough to engulf a giant animal, forced the predator to tear off pieces. Sometimes, the body would be broken apart, limbs wrenched free, the soft belly split open by rows of razor teeth. Every bite was a struggle, an act of raw power as the snake pulled and twisted, using its own body as leverage against the weight of the fallen creature. Scavengers quickly learned to watch for these scenes. The aftermath of a wombi hunt left plenty for others. Torn remains scattered among the trampled grass, bones and fur marking the spot where the king of constrictors had dined. Carnivorous marsupials, smaller lizards, even ancient birds would move in after the main event, each drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of a meal that could feed many mouths. The landscape itself bore the scars of these encounters. Bloodstains on rocks, flattened undergrowth, trails where desperate prey had tried and failed to break free. In this world, nowhere was truly safe. Survival meant more than speed or size. It demanded constant vigilance. Danger could slither across the ground, descend from the branches, or lurk just beneath the water's edge. Giant snakes like wombi hunted with patience and force, but they were far from the only threat. In the rivers, ancient crocodiles like quincana waited for anything that ventured too close. Their sprints on land were as deadly as their stealth in water, and even a brief pause at a riverbank could be a fatal mistake. Above, the trees were hardly a refuge. Wombi and its kin were adept climbers, their muscular bodies weaving silently through branches, their eyes ever watchful for signs of movement below. Marsupials and birds that fled upward risked finding themselves ensnared by coils or dragged down to the forest floor, leaving only a rain of feathers or tufts of fur behind. Even the open plains offered little relief. Megalania, the land dragon, roamed these spaces, its massive form visible from afar, but no less dangerous for the warning it gave. The art of staying alive in this age required more than instinct. Animals developed sharper senses, keener hearing, acute smell, the ability to detect the faintest tremor in the earth or ripple in the water. Herds grew more cohesive, with lookout sentinels and alarm calls that could spark a stampede at the first hint of danger. Burrows deepened, nests were better hidden, and the patterns of feeding and migration changed to avoid the peak hours of the hunters. Yet even with all this adaptation, the odds often tilted toward the predator. The matsoids could wait for hours, camouflaged perfectly among roots or rocks, while quincana's patience at a waterhole might outlast the thirst of the most desperate animals. Night brought no peace, only a shift in the pattern of threats, as some hunters slept and others awoke. In this world, fear was not a passing emotion, but a daily companion, sharpening the minds and reflexes of every living thing. Ancient Australia was a place where the hunt never truly ended, and where safety was always provisional. Every step, every pause to drink, every climb or flight through the branches was a gamble against an unseen enemy. Blood on the grass, a vanished herd member, a silent ripple on the water. These were the reminders that in a kingdom ruled by monsters both seen and hidden, survival depended on learning to expect the unexpected and to run before the shadow ever touched your path. In the relentless arms race of ancient Australia, terror did not always arrive on scales or slither through grass. Sometimes it watched from a tree branch, eyes glinting in the half-light, muscles taut with silent promise. This was Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion, a creature whose very presence forced the land's giants to rethink what it meant to be prey. At first glance, Thylacoleo seemed to break all the rules. It was a marsupial, a distant cousin to the kangaroo and wombat, yet its body whispered secrets of a different ancestry, one born for violence. Roughly the size of a modern lioness, but thicker and lower to the ground, Thylacoleo carried up to 260 pounds of lean, coiled muscle. Every inch of its frame was designed for ambush and lethal efficiency, not the endless chases favored by cats of the savannah. Its skull was short and deep, the architecture of a specialist. Instead of the classic canine fangs of big cats, Thylacoleo's most remarkable weapons were its enormous chisel-shaped upper incisors. These teeth jutted forward, long and knife-like, capable of stabbing deep into flesh and creating wounds that bled freely. At the sides of its jaws, bladed premolars acted as natural cleavers, sharp, broad, and engineered to slice through muscle and bone alike. When the jaws snapped shut, the pressure was fearsome. Estimates place its bite force at more than 1,000 pounds per square inch, making it, pound for pound, one of the most powerful biters among all mammals living or extinct. But Thylacoleo was more than just a set of formidable jaws. Its forelimbs were short, immensely strong, ending in retractable hooked claws, the only marsupial to have developed such a feature. These claws could pierce, grip, and hold struggling prey, pulling a victim closer even as the jaws found their mark. Semi-opposable thumbs enhanced its dexterity, allowing it to climb trees, haul itself onto low branches, or cling tightly to a catch. For creatures fleeing in panic, escape was rarely an option once the lion committed to the attack. Ambush was the marsupial lion's hallmark. It would lie in wait, hidden by thickets or perched above a game trail, every sense tuned to the rhythms of the forest. When prey wandered too close, a young diprotodon, a giant kangaroo, or even the unwary offspring of a land dragon, the lion struck with a swift, brutal pounce. Its powerful back legs delivered a driving leap, the claws digging in as jaws locked onto a vital spot. Bones snapped, muscle parted. In moments, the struggle was over, the forest returning to silence as the predator dragged its kill away. Thylacoleo's design made it a paradox, a hunter as at home in the trees as on the ground, able to vanish in a moment or descend with explosive force. Its powerful chest and shoulder muscles hinted at a life spent climbing as much as killing, and it is likely that, like modern leopards, it sometimes stashed kills in the branches to protect them from scavengers. Even ancient giants learned to scan the canopy above and the shadows behind, for the marsupial lion could appear where least expected. No animal in its time combined such killing tools in one package: the bite of a bone breaker, the claws of a master climber, the stealth of a ghost. Thylacoleo carnifex was nightmare-made flesh, a reminder that in the forests and plains of old, terror came not only on reptilian feet, but sometimes on soft, padded paws, guided by intelligence, patience, and a relentless will to survive. Thylacoleo carnifex was not a hunter that left anything to chance. In the shadowy heart of ancient Australia, where every meal was contested and every shadow could hide a threat, it carried with it a set of tools that put even the most notorious predators of today to shame. Its arsenal was built for precision: teeth that acted as shears, claws that functioned as meat hooks, and a bite designed not only to kill, but to turn even the toughest carcass into a banquet. At the center of this deadly design were the marsupial lion's incisors and premolars, evolved far beyond the blunt grinders of its plant-eating relatives. The upper incisors jutted forward, thick and razor-edged, working almost like a pair of scissors. With each snap of its jaws, Thylacoleo could punch deep wounds into hide and muscle, opening arteries and soft tissue with a surgeon's efficiency. The real marvel, though, was further back in the mouth, the bladed premolars. Unlike the pointed carnassials of modern big cats or wolves, these teeth had sharp, broad surfaces honed for slicing and chopping. When the jaws closed, the blades met in perfect alignment, shearing through bone, cartilage, and sinew. It was a biting action so specialized that it's hard to find a true parallel among today's predators. While a lion or a tiger might use brute force and long canines to subdue prey, Thylacoleo's jaws delivered a surgical strike. One powerful bite, and the toughest bones would yield. This was not just a killing tool, but a butcher's kit, allowing the marsupial lion to strip flesh from bone with minimal effort. Once the kill was made, its teeth and jaws made short work of the remains, cracking through the armored hides of giant wombats or breaking open the thick bones of prehistoric kangaroos to reach the nutritious marrow within. The claws played an equally crucial role. Each forepaw ended in a set of curved, retractable talons, sharp enough to pierce hide, grip tree bark, or lock on to struggling prey. With a single swipe, Thylacoleo could open deep gashes or anchor itself to an animal twice its size. Its semi-opposable thumbs made its grip even more formidable, an evolutionary trick seen today in some tree-dwelling marsupials, but taken to its lethal extreme in the lion. These claws were not just for climbing, they were weapons, capable of pinning down a victim or dragging it out of dense undergrowth. The combination of shearing teeth and grasping claws made Thylacoleo a master at dismantling its food, wasting little and leaving behind only the toughest scraps for scavengers. Modern predators can dismember prey, but few do it with such specialized equipment. Even the great cats must work around unbreakable bones and armored hides, but the marsupial lion tore through them as if they were little more than obstacles to be swept aside. Yet perhaps Thylacoleo's greatest advantage lay above the ground. While the giants of its world lumbered through grasslands and the matzoid snakes coiled in the shadows, the marsupial lion turned the trees into hunting grounds. Its muscular shoulders and chest, paired with powerful, flexible limbs, allowed it to scale trunks and navigate tangled branches with the ease of a born climber. From above, it could observe the movements of herds or watch for the lone traveler. No branch was truly safe. Thylacoleo could ascend in silence, waiting motionless as the world moved unsuspectingly below. The attack from above was swift and devastating. With a calculated leap, it would drop from the canopy onto the back of its prey, claws sinking in for grip, jaws already seeking the vital spot at the base of the skull or the throat. Even a creature as massive as a giant kangaroo could be brought low by this precision assault. The element of surprise, combined with the lion's strength, gave it an edge that few land predators could match. Those that survived an attack often carried the scars as living warnings. The constant threat from above reshaped the behavior of every animal that shared Thylacoleo's range. Herds kept to more open spaces, glancing upward as often as they checked the ground. Nesting sites shifted to areas less accessible to climbing hunters. even the bravest marsupials developed an instinctive caution, a wariness of rustling leaves and the silent, predatory eyes that watched from the branches. In a land crowded with terrors, Thylacoleo carnifex was the one that came from the sky. Its teeth, claws, and climbing skills made the world a dangerous place not just on the ground, but in the trees above. A living reminder that, in ancient Australia, safety was always a question of where you looked, and vigilance was never optional. In the shifting mosaic of prehistoric Australia, terror wore many faces, and not all of them bore fangs or claws. Some lumbered quietly through eucalyptus groves and across open floodplains, their bulk casting long shadows in the golden light. Among these, none loomed larger, both in size and in reputation, than Diprotodon, the colossal herbivore that redefined what it meant to be gentle in a land where danger could come from any direction. Diprotodon looked, at first glance, like an animal plucked from a dream. Imagine a wombat, but one stretched and magnified by some impossible force. Its massive frame rising as high as a tall man's shoulder, its body as long as a modern sedan, and its weight pushing well over 3 tons. A living wall of fur, muscle, and bone, Diprotodon dominated the landscape not with aggression, but by sheer presence. Herds of these giants shaped the very land they walked upon. Pathways pressed into the earth, ancient riverbanks worn down by the constant movement of many feet. Clearings opened up as they browsed and grazed. Yet beneath their placid appearance lay a set of hidden threats. Diprotodon's skull was broad and powerful, housing enormous, ever-growing incisors that could shear through the toughest branches and bark. What looked like a tool for feeding could, in a moment of panic or defense, become a formidable weapon. The same muscles that powered their massive jaws for grinding vegetation could deliver a bite that no predator, not even a marsupial lion, would risk lightly. And their size was not merely for show. Diprotodon's bones were thick, its legs like living pillars, every step pressing hundreds of kilograms into the earth. Despite their peaceful routines, Diprotodons were not passive victims. Their size alone deterred many hunters, and their senses were sharply tuned to the possibility of ambush. When threatened, they could gather in tight, protective clusters, turning their heads outward, a wall of bone and teeth against any challenger. The lead animal, often a massive matriarch, would stamp and bellow, a warning that was enough to make even the boldest predator reconsider. If a threat pressed too close, Diprotodon could charge, swinging its head low and using its tusk-like incisors like scythes. The impact of such a blow, delivered with the full weight and momentum of several tons, was devastating. Bones snapped, bodies were tossed aside, and the message was unmistakable. Even in the kingdom of monsters, respect the herbivore. There was a dark side to their power as well. In times of drought or competition for food, Diprotodon herds could become unpredictable, trampling smaller creatures underfoot, clearing vast stretches of brush in their quest for sustenance. Young, old, or injured animals in their path might not survive the crossing. Their presence shaped the behavior of everything around them. Predators learned to target only the smallest or most isolated individuals. Scavengers followed in their wake for scraps left behind. And even the giant snakes kept a careful distance. Encounters between Diprotodon and the continent's great hunters were tense affairs. A marsupial lion or megalania might shadow a herd for days, watching for a weak or separated animal. The predators knew that a failed attack could be fatal. One misjudged leap, one careless approach, and the tables would turn. Claws and jaws would meet a wall of trampling feet and bone-crushing jaws. The forest would ring with the sounds of chaos as herbivore and hunter collided, the outcome uncertain until the dust settled. For all their strength, Diprotodons were not invincible. They lived in a world where vigilance was a daily habit and alliances within the herd were crucial. Yet their legacy was one of quiet dominance, a reminder that survival in ancient Australia was never just about killing. It was about enduring, adapting, and wielding power in unexpected ways. They were the forest's tanks, unstoppable when roused, unpredictable when threatened, and forever a part of the continent's deep, living memory. In a land ruled by monsters, the greatest lesson was clear. Never underestimate the ones who seem most peaceful, for sometimes the silent giants are the most dangerous of all. In the wild tapestry of ancient Australia, where predators stalked on powerful limbs and herbivores rumbled like living fortresses, another form of giant claimed the open spaces, a presence so strange and formidable that it blurred the boundary between legend and reality. This was the age of the giant birds, when shadows raced across the plains, not from wings, but from legs that thundered against the ground. Their story lingers in fragments of bone, in Aboriginal legends, and in the haunted memory of a land that once echoed with their heavy stride. For generations, tales of these towering birds have drifted through campfire stories and the oral traditions of Australia's first peoples. Some called them thunderbirds, spirits of the storm, bringers of omens and power. To witness their passage, it was said, was to glimpse a world where the ordinary rules of scale and possibility no longer applied. The reality, if anything, was just as spectacular as the myth. Standing nearly as tall as a person and weighing up to half a ton, these flightless giants moved with unexpected grace and speed. Their ancestors had once taken to the air, but as Australia's climate and landscape shifted, they traded flight for strength, wings for weapons, and the open sky for dominance over grassland and scrub. With massive, muscular legs and heavy, compact bodies, they could cover ground quickly, defending territory and searching for food across great distances. The most famous of these was Geniornis, a true titan among birds. Its heavy beak and powerful frame marked it as a force to be reckoned with, a creature that might have seemed like a walking boulder to any smaller animal in its path. Its feet, wide and clawed, were more than just tools for movement. They were instruments of defense and, when necessary, destruction. In moments of threat or rivalry, a single kick could shatter bones or send would-be attackers sprawling. Even the boldest predators gave these birds a wide berth, wary of the explosive power they could unleash in an instant. Myth and fact intermingle when it comes to the giant birds of Australia. For centuries, the bones of Geniornis and its kin lay scattered in dried lake beds and hidden caves, fueling speculation about creatures that once stalked the land. Some stories grew taller with each telling, turning birds into monsters capable of swallowing people whole or calling down storms with a beat of their wings. But beneath the exaggeration lay a truth that needed no embellishment. These were animals shaped by the same relentless forces that created the continent's other giants: climate, competition, and the unending need to survive. As day broke over ancient floodplains, the sight of a herd of giant birds moving together, feathers catching the first rays of sunlight, legs pounding out a slow rhythm, was a reminder that not all power came with claws or venom. Sometimes it came on two legs, armored in bone and sinew, eyes fixed on the horizon. The age of the giant birds was as much a part of Australia's wild legend as any land dragon or saber-toothed lion. A chapter where even the skies themselves seemed to touch the earth, and every track in the dust told a story of strength, mystery, and survival. Genyornis loomed across the open plains of ancient Australia, its silhouette at once strange and unmistakable. Taller than any person, and many times heavier, it walked with the heavy authority of an animal that feared little and claimed much. Unlike today's emus or ostriches, which seem skittish, almost apologetic in their haste to flee, Genyornis moved with purpose, each step deliberate, head held level as its broad beak scanned the horizon. Its eyes, set wide for panoramic vision, missed little. Its feathers, coarse and earth-colored, blended seamlessly with the sunburned grasslands and stony scrub. The body of Genyornis was built like a living battering ram. Massive hips and thighs gave its legs both speed and the kind of impact that could uproot saplings or send rivals sprawling. Its torso was barrel-like, muscular, and compact, anchoring the entire animal as it ran or fought. Wings had long since shrunk to useless nubs, replaced by the brutal practicality of legs capable of delivering kicks with astonishing force. But it was the beak that caught the eye, a heavy, down-curved weapon, not the slender nib of a simple grazer. Its edge was sharp enough to slice through tough vegetation, but there was more to this tool than feeding. Deep jaw muscles hinted at a bite that could crush rather than just nip. Traces on fossilized bones suggest that when food was scarce or rivals pressed too close, Genyornis might have turned to meat, scavenging, perhaps even taking smaller animals or eggs if the chance arose. In the shifting climate of its time, adaptability was as vital as strength. Despite its size, Genyornis was never just a lumbering presence. When threatened or challenged, it became a whirlwind of aggression. Defending a nest or driving off a predator, it would stamp and bellow, puffing up its feathers to appear even larger. But the real warning was in its feet. With 3 thick, clawed toes, Genyornis could unleash a kick powerful enough to shatter the ribs of a marsupial lion or break the leg of a giant kangaroo. Stories and scars lingered wherever these birds ranged, places where even the fiercest carnivores hesitated, learning quickly that sometimes the prize of a raid wasn't worth a fractured skull or crushed chest. In the open spaces they ruled, the hunting and defense tactics of giant birds became lessons in brute force and quick judgment. Unlike predators that relied on stealth, Genyornis was a sentinel. Its height gave it a vantage point, allowing it to spot trouble from far away. If danger came close, it did not cower or flee, but squared up, ready to defend itself or its young. The flock worked together, a wall of motion and sound. At the heart of their defense was the coordinated threat of those bone-breaking legs, able to launch synchronized counterattacks that could scatter predators or rival birds alike. When Genyornis moved to attack, the sequence was unmistakable. First, a burst of speed, surprisingly fast for such a large creature. Then, the lowering of its head and a snap of its heavy beak. The true weapon came last, the kick. With muscles coiled and hips pivoting, the leg flashed out, striking with a force that turned even the boldest enemy into a heap on the dust. Few animals risked a second encounter. The memory of that blow, or the sight of a crushed rival, sent the lesson echoing through herds and predators alike. In the open spaces they ruled, the hunting and defense tactics of giant birds became lessons in brute force and quick judgment. Unlike predators that relied on stealth, Genyornis was a sentinel. Its height gave it a vantage point, allowing it to spot trouble from far away. If danger came close, it did not cower or flee, but squared up, ready to defend itself or its young. The flock worked together, a wall of motion and sound. At the heart of their defense was the coordinated threat of those bone-breaking legs, able to launch synchronized counterattacks that could scatter predators or rival birds alike. When Genyornis moved to attack, the sequence was unmistakable. First, a burst of speed, surprisingly fast for such a large creature. Then, the lowering of its head and a snap of its heavy beak. The true weapon came last, the kick. With muscles coiled and hips pivoting, the leg flashed out, striking with a force that turned even the boldest enemy into a heap on the dust. Few animals risked a second encounter. The memory of that blow, or the sight of a crushed rival, sent the lesson echoing through herds and predators alike.
Their reign was a time when nothing could take safety for granted on the open land. To survive meant to respect the giants, to read the subtle cues of posture and movement, to know when to approach and when to back away. Genyornis, for all its bulk, was not simply a survivor, it was a sovereign, a force that could change the outcome of any confrontation. The marks it left on the land and in the memory of its contemporaries outlasted its bones, a final testament to the power of a giant bird that was much more than a gentle grazer. In ancient Australia, to ignore Genyornis was to gamble with fate, and more often than not, to lose. No refuge lasted long in ancient Australia. In this kingdom of monsters, even the sky above and the open plain offered no promise of safety. The forest canopy was watched by climbing lions. The grass was threaded with giant snakes. The rivers hid sprinting crocodiles. And if a creature thought to find security under the broad day, away from water or trees, it risked stumbling into the path of thunderous birds or land dragons. Fear was never local. It crept into every shadow and shimmered above every sun-bleached rock, an invisible pressure that pressed down from above and swelled up from below. Day and night, ancient Australia was a world of risk. The very air was alive with threat, the distant call of a bird or the sudden hush in the brush, signaling that something massive, silent, and dangerous was near. Sometimes the enemy crashed through undergrowth or thundered across the plain in plain sight. Sometimes it arrived in a heartbeat, as a shadow falling from a branch, or the grass parting under a thick, scaled body. No pattern of movement guaranteed survival. To run was to risk meeting an ambush ahead. To climb was to gamble against the hunters who knew the trees as well as any leaf eater. Even taking flight, if you were small enough to have wings, was little assurance. There were predatory birds as well, keen-eyed and relentless, ready to strike from the blue with claws and beaks honed by millennia of rivalry. For the first humans to set foot on this ancient continent, the challenges were unlike any they had faced before. These newcomers were met not by an empty land, but by a living labyrinth of giants, each one a test of nerve, ingenuity, and endurance. The old instincts, run, hide, hope, were suddenly not enough. If people were to endure here, they needed something different: the ability to anticipate, to plan, to work together in ways no other species had mastered. Early human survival depended on learning the subtle rules of this dangerous place. They mapped the habits and territories of the giants, memorized migration routes, and watched for patterns in the way herds moved and predators waited. Spears and simple stone tools became extensions of the hand and mind, leveling the playing field between fragile flesh and armored hide. Fire, tamed and carried, was both a shield and a signal, a way to clear brush, drive back night hunters, and shape the world with heat and light. But it was cooperation that turned the tide. People learned to move as a group, watching each other's backs, sharing stories and warnings around the fire. They used strategy, driving prey toward traps, using the land's contours as natural barriers, setting ambushes of their own where predators least expected them. In this web of mutual aid, every person mattered, every role was critical. The strong protected the weak, the experienced taught the young, and every fresh track in the dust was read and discussed with care. With each passing generation, humans became part of the land's rhythm, not just enduring the threats, but turning some of them into opportunities. Where once the roar of a predator meant only fear, now it could signal a chance for scavenging or learning. The giants, for all their strength, were slow to adapt to a new kind of threat, a species that fought not with fang or muscle, but with intelligence, memory, and unity. The relentless, all-encompassing fear that once kept every animal on edge slowly became a different kind of tension, the measured watchfulness of a creature that knows both danger and possibility. The story of survival was no longer only about running or hiding, but about changing the world together, about standing shoulder to shoulder in the long grass, setting traps along the water, and meeting the eyes of monsters without flinching. Against the odds, humans claimed their place in this land of titans, not by overpowering the giants, but by outthinking them, turning the very landscape of fear into a stage for courage and invention. There is a moment in every story of survival when the balance of power shifts, when those who once fled become the pursuers, when a single spark of ingenuity ignites a change that cannot be undone. In ancient Australia, this turning point arrived quietly at first. A band of hunters tracking a herd through the dawn, the glow of controlled fire flickering on their faces, the sharp edge of a newly crafted spear in each hand, but its impact would ripple across the continent, rewriting the very rules by which giants had ruled for millennia. For ages, the land had belonged to creatures of overwhelming force. Land dragons, thunderous birds, titanic wombats, and ambush predators whose jaws and claws had shaped every pattern of life. Yet as humans spread, these rules began to fracture. The old ways, relying on size, speed, or armored skin, meant little against adversaries who studied, adapted, and refused to follow the same script twice. Where other prey scattered in panic, humans watched and learned. Where predators circled for hours, people laid traps, guided herds, and transformed the environment itself to suit their needs. The earliest victories were small. A successful hunt at a waterhole where a diprotodon fell, not to jaws, but to a volley of carefully aimed spears. A night raid on a giant bird's nesting ground, coordinated with stealth and precision. Over time, each triumph added to a growing body of knowledge. Lessons whispered around fires, strategies passed from parent to child, innovations refined with every season. The weapons grew sharper, the tactics more sophisticated. Fire became more than just warmth or light. It became a tool for reshaping the land, for driving game and clearing forests, for creating safe corridors and trapping the unwary. With every advance, the fear that had once pressed in from every side began to shift. Now it was the giants who faced uncertainty, who paused at the edge of a clearing, wary of human scent or the unnatural silence of a place recently burned. Megalania and Thylacoleo, Quincona and Geniornis, all the old titans found themselves in a world that no longer belonged solely to tooth and claw. A single thrown spear could wound what once had been untouchable. A coordinated group could outlast, outwit, and eventually overcome even the most formidable enemy. This transformation was not immediate, nor was it gentle. For generations, people paid dearly for every lesson learned. There were nights when a misplaced camp or an unwatched child meant tragedy. Days when a single mistake would bring the swift retribution of predator or stampeding herd. But over time, survival became mastery. The knowledge of tracks, trails, and animal behavior grew so acute that humans could predict migrations, find hidden nests, and turn the predator's own strategies against them. Slowly, the giants began to dwindle. Not all at once, not everywhere, but as centuries passed, the balance tipped further. Some fell to direct hunting, their numbers unable to recover from the new and relentless pressure. Others were outcompeted, their food sources claimed or landscapes changed by human fire and ingenuity. Even the bravest predators learned to avoid the scent of people, to move away from the ring of firelight, to treat the sound of laughter and singing as a warning rather than an opportunity.
Where fear had once stalked humanity at every turn, now it crept into the hearts of the monsters themselves. The ancient Australian zoo, once a theater of overwhelming power and danger, became a new kind of wilderness, one shaped by intelligence, cooperation, and the unstoppable will to survive. For the first time, humans were not just part of the ecosystem. They were its architects, capable of toppling giants and remaking the world. The age of monsters ended not with a roar, but with the quiet footsteps of people moving through the dawn, their shadows long across the land. In that moment, the story of ancient Australia changed forever. The hunted became the hunter, and the wildest continent on Earth found a new, unexpected ruler. The end of Australia's Age of Giants unfolded not in a single cataclysm, but as a long, silent retreat, a fading of titans from the land they once ruled. For thousands of years, the continent echoed with the footsteps of diprotodons, the rumble of thunderbirds, and the slow, patient movements of the great land dragons. But as humans spread, those echoes grew fainter. The line between legend and memory blurred, and the mighty vanished, leaving only questions, bones, and stories behind. Many forces conspired in this disappearance. The climate itself was changing. Rain patterns shifted, lakes and rivers dried or shrank, and the vast grasslands that once fed the giants contracted. Yet these cycles had come before, and the monsters had survived, adapting their habits, moving with the seasons, enduring hunger and hardship as only the most resilient can. This time, though, the challenge was different. Alongside the shifting weather came a new kind of threat, one that did not simply consume or compete, but transformed the very structure of the world. Humans, arriving in waves and spreading across the continent, brought with them a pace of change that the slow-breeding giants could not match. Fire was set deliberately, not just by lightning storms, but by hands seeking to clear brush, drive game, or protect settlements. The landscape itself was reordered, reshaped into a patchwork of grass and scrub that favored smaller, faster, more adaptable animals. Great herds fragmented, nesting sites vanished, and ancient migration routes, once safe, became corridors of risk. Then there was the hunt.
No predator before had targeted the giants so systematically or with such efficiency. Spears and traps could bring down even the largest prey, while collective strategies meant that no creature was truly safe, no matter how imposing its size or armor. Each successful hunt was a victory, but also a subtraction, a slow, irreversible erosion of the populations that had once dominated the land. Archaeological evidence tells this story in fragments: scatterings of butchered bones, sudden gaps in the fossil record, layers of charcoal from ancient firestorms. At rock shelters and lake shores, stone tools lie beside the shattered remains of creatures no human has seen alive in millennia. The timing is uncanny. Again and again, the last traces of the giants coincide with the spread of people, with new artifacts, with the rise of organized hunting and landscape burning. Some scientists argue that climate played the leading role. Others point to the hand of humankind, but most agree that in the end, it was the combination, a perfect storm of shifting seasons and the arrival of an adaptable, relentless new species that sealed the fate of the Titans. Yet the giants have never wholly disappeared. Their bones still surface in dry creek beds, in the deep red earth of caves, and under the roots of ancient trees. Enormous teeth, fossilized footprints, the armored plates of long-vanished reptiles all whisper the secrets of a world that once was. Aboriginal stories remember them too, preserving in myth and song the shapes and habits of monsters that lived and died before the first cities were built. In these stories, the giants are both warning and wonder, spirits that shaped the land, beings who must be respected, whose shadows linger at the edges of the known world. For every child who glimpses a strange rock and wonders if it is a bone, for every hunter who feels watched at a lonely waterhole, for every storyteller spinning tales around a fire, the giants live on. Their absence changed the fate of a continent, but their memory endures, echoing across millennia as proof that the world was once wilder, grander, and filled with creatures that tested the courage of everyone who dared to walk among them. Today, the wild places of Australia still carry a sense of expectation, a quiet alertness that lingers at the edge of every forest, every billabong, every stretch of desert shimmering under the sun. Some of this is practical, a lifetime of watching for snakes on a hiking trail, listening for the warning rattle of a goanna in the brush, or keeping a respectful distance from a river known for its ancient armored residents. But woven deeper, in the marrow of every cautious gesture and every whispered legend, is something older, a genetic memory of giants.
Generations after the last land dragon vanished, the shadow of those titans shapes how people see the land. Fear and fascination, passed down in stories and in habits, mark every encounter with Australia's remaining wildness. The caution with which a child lifts a rock, the reverence in the voice of a ranger describing a saltwater crocodile, the pride and nervous laughter when locals swap stories about close calls with spiders or box jellyfish. All of these are echoes of a time when the land itself was alive with dangers far greater than any faced today. This inherited respect isn't only about self-preservation. It's a form of awe, a recognition that the earth beneath our feet is ancient, and that even the smallest patch of bush or outback holds the memory of creatures who once bent the world to their will. The landscapes may seem empty in places, but beneath every gum tree and within every hidden gorge, the ghosts of the past remain, not to be feared blindly,
but to be understood as part of the continent's ongoing story. Australia's reputation as nature's hardest level is not just a product of its snakes, spiders, or even its catastrophic fires. It's something deeper, a consequence of living on a continent where survival has always demanded ingenuity, caution, and adaptability. Here, nature does not offer guarantees. Flood or drought, fire or storm, the rules are always shifting, and those who thrive are the ones who pay attention. From the ancient marsupial lions to today's cunning magpies and elusive taipans, Australia rewards those who learn, adapt, and, above all, respect the wild. It is this intensity that draws people from across the world, chasing a thrill or a story. And it is this same intensity that keeps those who live here humble. The cycle is unbroken. The land tests, people respond, and new legends grow. Each generation inherits not only the challenges, but the awe, the thrill of glimpsing a shadow in the reeds, the hush that falls when something large moves beyond the firelight, the feeling of being small in a place built for giants. In the end, the shadow of ancient monsters is not just a warning. It's a reminder of what it means to share the world with forces beyond our control. The legacy of Australia's giants teaches humility and imagination, inviting all who listen to see the land not just a resource to be used, but as a living tapestry woven from deep time and wild memory. To honor these echoes is to look closely at the creatures who remain, to protect the wild places, and to tell the stories that keep old lessons alive. For as long as rivers wind and storms gather, as long as children stare wide-eyed at strange tracks in the dust, the giants of the past will never be truly gone. They will walk beside us, unseen but remembered, urging us to live with care, with wonder, and with the courage to meet the wild on its own terms.